On a cold November evening in 1966, a young mother was found in her own home under strange and mysterious circumstances. Her death would soon become a chilling unsolved crime that haunted a small town for nearly 6 decades. Despite the discovery of several suspicious clues at the scene, police were unable to gather enough evidence to solve the case at the time. For years, it seemed as if the truth would never come to light until one phone call nearly 60 years later changed everything. The case that had long been buried in obscurity was about to be reopened, and the truth that was hidden for so long from investigators would finally come out. Karen Snyder was born on July 29, 1948, in the small American town of Cedar Lake, Indiana. She was one of 6 children in a large, close-knit family, with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Growing up, Karen lived a fairly ordinary life, surrounded by the chaos and love of her siblings. At just 17 years old, Karen met a man named Paul, and the two quickly became inseparable. Though young, Karen and Paul made the decision to get married soon after they met. They had their first child in 1966, a beautiful daughter who would become the center of Karen's world. Even though she is only 18 years old, Karen is determined to start a family, and Paul is equally eager to take on the role of a father and husband. With their growing family, Karen and Paul moved to a small town called Calumet, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. The town, which had a population of only about 2,500, was quiet, peaceful, and known for being a very safe place to live. Karen spent most of her time at home, caring for their newborn daughter, while Paul worked at the local railway station. Paul's parents lived a couple of houses from these so they could help Karen and spend time with their grandchild. Though life seemed perfect until November 12, 1966. It was just an ordinary day, and Paul was working his evening shift at the train station. However, when he tried to call Karen to check in, his calls went unanswered. At first, Paul thought nothing of it. Perhaps Karen had gone to the store or was busy with their daughter. But after several attempts to reach her, his concern grew. This was strange because Karen had always been home during his shifts, and she was very reliable about picking up the phone. When Paul couldn't reach her, he turned to his parents, who lived nearby. They didn't have a spare key to the house, but they agreed to go over and check on her. After a few more attempts to contact Karen, Paul became very worried, and he decided to leave work early to check on her himself. When Paul arrived at the house, he immediately noticed that something wasn't right. The porch light, which Karen always left on when he worked late, was off. The blinds on the windows were tightly drawn, something that was unusual for Karen. The door was unlocked, but when Paul entered the house was eerily quiet. He called out for Karen, but there was no response. He started searching the house, checking each room. The daughter was sleeping in her bed, and he kept looking for Karen. As he walked through the first floor, Paul became even more worried. The second-floor light switch wasn't working, and when he finally reached their bedroom, he was met with a horrifying sight. Karen's body was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her body showed no signs of life. Paul immediately feared the worst. He tried calling her name, but there was no response. Panicked, Paul rushed outside with their daughter and called 911. When the police and paramedics arrived, they confirmed what Paul had already feared. Karen was dead. But how? The police quickly arrived at the scene and began their investigation. They started by examining the locks on the back door, where they found shallow notches that indicated an attempted break-in. It seemed that the killer had tried to enter through the back door, but was unable to. They then found a broken window in the basement. Blood stains led from the window along the street to the front door, which was unlocked. The investigators believed that the perpetrator had tried to break in through the back door, but failed. When that didn't work, he decided to enter through the basement. The glass from the broken window had injured the attacker, as there were blood traces on the shards. The fact that the front door was unlocked, or possibly opened by Karen herself, was telling. The question remained. Did Karen let the killer in, or had the attacker already had a key? The scene inside the house was very disturbing. In the living room there were even more signs of blood, and investigators believed the woman was attacked there, possibly near her daughter's crib. The trail of blood continued from the living room up the stairs and into the bedroom. It was in this bedroom that Karen's body was discovered, surrounded by broken objects, further suggesting she had fought for her life until the very end. Investigators also noticed something strange. The phone in the bedroom had been ripped from the wall. This led them to believe that Karen had tried to call for help before the attacker reached her. However, the police noted that the number she likely dialed, 911, was incorrect. The phone had been pulled out, and experts speculated that in the panic, Karen may have dialed the wrong number. The crime scene provided even more evidence. A light bulb, which had been unscrewed and covered in blood, was found on the floor. Why would the attacker take the time to do this? Was it to disable the light, or did it serve some other purpose? Investigators weren't sure. In the bathroom, detectives found bloody clothes and a washcloth, likely used by the killer to try and wipe off the blood. It seemed that the attacker had stayed in the house for a while after the murder, attempting to cover his tracks. But ultimately, he left behind too much evidence. Due to the attempts to cover up the crime, the investigators were able to piece together a terrifying image of what happened. A struggle had occurred. Karen had fought for her life in the living room, attempting to escape the killer. The attacker had overpowered her, dragging her upstairs to the bedroom where the brutal killing took place. Initially, police believed that the motive was robbery, but only a small amount of money, about $50, and a lamp, which had no real value, were missing. The evidence of the attack pointed toward something much more personal. Forensic experts determined that Karen had been stabbed 124 times, with most of the wounds concentrated in the chest area. The weapon was likely a knife with a narrow blade, similar to a stiletto. Despite the extensive wounds, there were no signs of sexual assault, leading investigators to focus on other possible motives. Had Karen's death been a result of an argument or a crime of passion? As the investigation progressed, detectives began to question everyone close to Karen. Her husband, Paul, was the first person of interest. The door was unlocked, and the house appeared to have been staged to look like a robbery. Paul was interviewed multiple times, but he denied any involvement. Investigators continued to dig into his whereabouts and alibi, but they found no evidence to link him to the crime. The case grew cold, and years passed without significant progress. Eventually, in 1973, Karen's father passed away, still not knowing who had killed his daughter. In 1977, her mother died as well, also without closure. Paul remarried and Karen's daughter grew up, but the pain of losing her mother haunted them both. Then in 2024, after nearly 6 decades, a breakthrough happened. A man, who had heard stories about the case from his grandmother, contacted the police. He wondered if modern technology could help solve the case. His call restarted the investigation. The detectives reopened the case, and they were shocked to find that all the evidence had been carefully preserved over the years. Through advanced forensic techniques, they were able to extract DNA from the blood left behind by the killer. The DNA matched James, a man who had been close to Karen and Paul. James had been a friend of the family and had worked on the house before the murder. When police confronted him with the evidence, James confessed to the crime. The details were haunting. He had feelings for Karen and was jealous of her husband, Paul. On the night of the murder, he had been heavily intoxicated, which pushed him to commit the brutal crime. James, now 70 years old, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Though his health was failing and his chances of surviving a prison sentence were slim, the case was finally solved. Karen's daughter, now in her 50s, was informed that the man who killed her mother had finally been brought to justice. It was a bittersweet moment. Years of pain and unanswered questions had come to an end. Karen Snyder's case serves as a reminder that justice, no matter how long it takes, will always eventually find a way. The truth, though delayed, was finally uncovered, and for Karen's family, the pain of the loss was alleviated, if only slightly, with the knowledge that the killer was held accountable. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you found this story compelling, be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to check the links in the description for more updates. As always, remember, Justice may take years, even decades, but it is never truly out of reach. Thank you for watching.